Good afternoon and welcome to this latest episode of The Elephant TV. And today it's my great pleasure to be joined by my friend Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, who is a Horn of Africa analyst, specialist, and we'll be having a conversation about development in the Horn, specifically Ethiopia, which is Kenya's giant neighbor, where a lot of developments have been taking place. But we Kenyans don't actually follow very closely what's happening in Ethiopia. Sometimes we tend to follow what the Western press is saying and then report it. So I thought speaking to you, Halakhe, would be illuminating. Halakhe you're Kenyan from Marsabit, but currently in New York.
I'm currently in Washington.
In Washington, D.C. Aha.
Yes, I'm neighboring our friend.
Okay. Oh, okay. Karibu.
Asante.
And let me just ask, how are you doing? How's Washington? We've been reading about Corona, Corona hapa, Corona huko, and Washington D.C. is headquarters of the policy making around this issue.
It is very interesting, John. You know, when you are in the diaspora, it is always trying to negotiate the home and the host country's drama. And, naturally, in an ideal world, when Corona is not available, one of those places will be doing well.
Yes.
But in this Corona period, I am always, panic scrolling through what is going on in Kenya.
Yeah.
While at the same time trying to stay abreast of what is going on in the United States. Yeah. And it's very illuminating to look at Kenya as a Kenyan not living in Kenya.
Yeah.
And looking at the United States as a Kenyan living in the United States. Some of the, myths, some of the ideas that we had about, how certain countries are good or not good is completely flattened. I'll give an example. Immediately when the COVID outbreak started, we had to take our kids out of school very quickly because my young daughter has some mild underlying condition. We didn't wait for the state. But, now September, end of this month, they will be going back to school, but the school will be online. Initially, they were saying, they'll be coming in for 2 days. In my head, I was very clear. I mean, my daughter is not going back to school. Okay. But in Kenya, the CS moved very quickly. Schools are closed, and you don't have debates around that. You can have debates around tourism coming in, hotels serving alcohol, but you don't have that. But it's a really useful time to be, looking at some of these, previously held assumption that, one country or sets of countries are good and better at managing some of these things. Sure, we can be blamed on individuals, but I think COVID, there is an opportunity for us to explore some of these things in further details, get beyond the headlines.
Thanks, but you and your family are otherwise okay, safe,
thank
healthy?
God. Yeah, both here and at home. Yes, thank you.
Asante sana.
Yes.
Thanks, Abdullahi. As I had mentioned, what we're interested in very much today is to discuss Ethiopia and developments that have been taking place in Ethiopia. And let me just ask a very pedestrian question, just for you to set a context for us. Ethiopia is led by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, very dynamic young premier, winner of the Nobel Prize for Peace for regularizing the relationship with Eritrea, with whom Ethiopia had a major war. But give us, give the viewers a bit of a background, Abdullahi, with regard to this political, economic, the social circumstances that led to this dynamic Abiy Ahmed to become Prime Minister of Ethiopia.
Thank you so much, John. I think a good place to start that would be 1991, when the dark, Marxist-Leninist junta was overthrown. And immediately after they overthrew the junta, the EPDRF, that is the Ethiopia People's Revolutionary Democratic Front, thought to address some of the ills of the centralized state. And so with that in mind, EPDRF is a coalition of 4 major political parties. That is the Tigrinya Liberation Front, the Southern Ethiopian People's Democratic Movement, the Amara National Democratic Movement, and the Oromo People's Democratic Organization. So if you look at even the names, some are fronts, some are movements, some are organizations, but they are predominantly, ethnic-based organizations. But the reality was that was the reality of that was given legal assent through the 1995 multi-ethnic federal constitution, where you have the state, federal state, doing its functions and powers, whereas also regional, and that they divided the country in more or less around 10, such regional federations. But for the communities like the Oromo, who constitute around 34% of the 100 million, that didn't go far enough. So they have been grumbling, they have been making their case. Sure, things are not what they were under Derg, where even the use of the Oromo language was literally banned. But, they wanted, something to change incredibly significantly. It's similar in some ways where, the marginal communities in Kenya are saying that we want the devolution that goes full hog rather than these, half houses. But, EPDRF was mostly controlled by Melles's wing, that is the TPLF, the Tigranian Liberation Front, and they didn't give much in. And one of the things that they did very well is, particularly the personality of Meles, is to market Ethiopia as a shining example in a region that is bedeviled by conflict, incessant conflict. I mean, the Horn, for a lot of time we forget how combustible the Horn is. You have Ethiopia on one side, you have Eritrea, you have Somalia, and post the end of Cold War, because some of the remnants of the impact of the Cold War were still there. 77, 78, the Ogaden War, where the government of the then Siad Barre wanted to annex part of Somalia. And, United States supporting one side, the USSR, as well as Cuba supporting one side, made the area completely militarized. And so he's seen as somebody who is transforming this country. He became the darling of, Western multilateral institution. The country was growing at, double-digit figures. But within that also, if you look at it, one season of when the rain fails, the country is still struggling. These are some of the, dynamics that a lot of the time people do not want to wrestle with. Also, what they did was, because when they came in, they were an incredibly disciplined, militia that came into government. But they never translated that discipline into transparency. So they fused the state, the party, and the people. While in theory that looks incredibly, useful, in practice, anytime you go against the state, anytime you say something that is opposing the government, anytime that you say something that opposes the state, you are automatically bona fide enemy of the state, enemy of the people. That became very useful tool in suppressing any form of dissent. But what Meles was good at was he was able to deliver goods in terms of development. The second element to Melles's, useful ability to cobble together and retain these for decades was his ability to make the Ethiopia as the vanguard of the Western interest in the region. Here he's saying, look, I am bordered by Somalia, a safe haven for, global transnational jihadi movement. Ethiopia is one place that can do that. The 2009, anti-terror proclamation was probably one of the most severe laws that you have anywhere in the world. And he used it very well. They used that also very well to go and invade Somalia in 2006 during the rise of Union of Islamic Court. And that, created a very difficult dynamic that has already been brewing since mid-late 70s inside Ethiopia, inside Somalia. So it was this, clever use of, past history, the global dynamics to suppress what was going on at home. But, you know, in 2012, Meles dies, and 2014 to 2017, 18 when he came into power. In 2014, you know, the Addis Metropolitan Plan wanted to expand Addis, the city, into some parts that are neighboring towns and regions, and that fit practically into the Oromo people's land. They say this is a Trojan horse for large scale taking over of land grab of the of the Oromo people, who have for a very long time nursed historical and contemporary injustice that has been meted on the community. And so the community is opposed. Every Saturday for years, since 2014, around April, people were demonstrating across hundreds of towns inside Ethiopia. But the state came, you know, very hard, you know, very harsh in terms of suppressing that. But that became untenable. I should add that, you know, once Meles died in 2012, the Prime Minister, Haile Mariam Desalegn, became the Prime Minister. But it became untenable when the demonstration and protests were going on every day. And so Abiy, who was, you know, part of the Oromo wing of the EPDRF, was elected now to take over from him. Last year, he won the Nobel Prize for the rapprochement between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Eritrea, which seceded from Ethiopia in 1991, but then they fought a bloody war over, you know, a small piece of land called Badme, and that was seen as an opportunity. And once he came into power, the guy moved like, you know, in an incredible speed, releasing political prisoners,
Prime Minister.
Yes, Prime Minister Abiy, he's young, I mean, 41, releasing political prisoners, rapprochement with Eritrea, trying to mediate in the political drama in Sudan. You know, he was doing incredible amount of stuff, and these generated an astronomical level of expectations. But even then, you knew that Abiy mania was not going to last. It was very clear. The historical challenges that he was facing, he wasn't going to deliver. And some of it, I think you could see him having a fairly, you know, if not misguided, messianic sense that in his personality, he will be able to deliver some of these things. You know, even if you look at even very closely the Eritrea-Ethiopian rapprochement, I mean, it's not guided by a very strong institutional backing. You know, I mean, like it's him and Isaias Afewerki trying to sort this out, which is an incredibly important piece when you look at the Horn. But what a lot of people underestimate is Isaias Afewerki. I mean, he's a very, very tricky customer. He withstood, you know, the demonization that Meles and Ethiopia visited upon him. They fought to a standstill over Badme with Ethiopia. You know, UN Security Council sanctions that were, for most part, you know, imposed on him and people surrounding him and the country. Although after rapprochement, that has been lifted unilaterally. He is not somebody that you want to mess around. You know, he knows what he's doing. And so Abiy came into that space. The first part was an incredible amount of work. The level of you know, optimism is generated, the rock star personality that he had, both domestically and at the global level. But that now is slowly diminishing. You know, last year, he dissolved the EPDRF into a single party called the Prosperity Party. And what that means is TPLF said, we are not going to join your party. So there is that drama. There were some parts of the Oromo, the splinter groups within Oromo said, we are not part of your business. And so now he's facing a dilemma. In August, because his term, he wasn't elected. So his term, the election was supposed to be held in August. He has postponed that election more or less indefinitely. I mean, he used the cover of COVID and, you know, an advisory commission that said, you know, the condition is not necessary and it will be held within 8 to 12 months once the situation post-COVID goes to normal. That you cannot guarantee. That is a danger. The danger because of the history of Ethiopia, but also the term of this current parliament ends October 5th.
let me just take you back, just maybe to dig a bit deeper. There was the death of this very popular Oromo musician and activist, Hachalu Hundessa.
Yes.
Which led to demonstrations that caused a bit of surprise, especially because these were Oromos
Yes.
in major demonstrations against a government that is led by an Oromo.
Yes.
And maybe because of coming with my Kenyan biases,
Yes.
I think if you have an Oromo in
power,
you should be the last ones to be complaining. But the government cracked down quite hard on the demonstrations that followed the killing of Hundessa. What was that about? I mean, what's the internal dynamic? Within the greater Oromo, because many Kenyans don't know that the Oromo speakers are all the way into Kenya. The Gabra, Orana,
yes.
Oromo speakers.
Yes.
And but there's this very powerful and roiling dynamic that Abiy is trying to manage in Ethiopia. What's that about, and how does Mr. Hundessa's
fits in?
Death fit into this whole unfolding situation?
I think we need one of the ways of assessing this is really looking at who Hundessa Hachalu is. Okay. Here is a young man, born 86, and he was born a few years before 1991. He is among the first generation of Oromos who came of who benefited from schools and education being done in their language. And then when he turned 17, he was arrested. And most of the songs that he's singing are songs that he composed when he was in prison. He was in prison for 5 years. And he was released. And some of the songs that you hear during the 2014 and 2017-18, when the Oromos were protesting, his songs formed the soundtrack for the protest. So he is a young man completely. I mean, some of his songs, if you listen to them, they speak to the average Oromo person, their struggles. He asked in one of his songs, "Why do we live?" In one of his songs, latter song that was sung after his death, Jirra, which means we are here, and it's metaphorical in the sense that people are saying, Hundessa might be gone, we are here. There is no way now you can look at us in any different way, because this is 34% of 100 million people who've marginalized for a very long time. And so Hundessa's he made Oromos feel really, I mean, it's part of a longer tradition. He taps into a very strong, rich historical dynamic within the Oromo, where, songs, music of protest, of prison becomes a really unifying rallying call. That has been very phenomenal. And he rose very quickly. He was embraced very quickly. But, he was not even very anti-Abiy, because some of the people around Abiy have started feeling he wasn't really going to drive the kind of reform that they wanted. So there are people who have already started grumbling, postponing of the elections, coming very hard on some of the protesters. And within all this, then Hundessa, who gave an interview 1 week before his death to the first only, independent Oromo media network, and he said some things that people weren't comfortable with on both sides. He mentioned, giving Abiy some time to do what he was supposed to do, which was interpreted by people who didn't like Abiy as like, oh, even him is folding. There are certain things that he said about, Menelik that people on the other side did not like it. But the trouble is, nobody knows within such an incredibly difficult, volatile, where the information network is incredibly inaccurate, it's very difficult who could go for him. One could justify one way or the other. You spend a few times, on social media in Ethiopia, once the internet was internet block was lifted, you could see everybody pulling in different direction. But the thing was, for a lot of Ethiopians, and particularly Oromos, this is an epistemic rupture between Oromo and Abiy. You know, whatever happens from here on, Abiy will really struggle in trying to get back the faith that he has. I'm not 100% sure if elections are held today and Abiy contests, he will have such a massive following within the Oromo population, particularly the younger people who have identified with Hundessa's music, Hundessa's vision, Hundessa's, you know, way of imagining the Ethiopia that they really wanted. And so I think that is the dynamic a lot of the time from outside will not be very easy. Oromos are, yes, they are huge, but they are not monolithic in their outlook. They are not huge in what they want. They are those who are federalists. They are those who want, you know, a centralized state. And I think for Abiy, I think the challenge has always been, you know, he generated tremendous amount of expectations without really investing a requisite amount of, if you will, institutional capacity to do that. And, you know, for a state that is, whose first instinct is to repress, for a state, for a guerrilla movement that came into power, that was incredibly disciplined. I mean, some of the books you read about them, I mean, like they minimized the number of cigarettes that they smoked. I mean, they wore, you know, stuff, used clothes to just make it happen. When they came in, they still lived with some of those ethos, disciplined, yes, but they lacked transparency. I mean, how would you explain right now as you're speaking, John, close to 7,000 people have been arrested after Hundessa's death. Yes. Over almost 250 people are killed because of this shutting down of internet. So the part that gets to a lot of people who thought 1995 multi-federal constitution didn't go enough, they are now looking at them now being taken to the dark time where Abiy is trying to centralize power and authority for himself. So, I mean, like that is now a really worrying situation. We're talking about 100 million people. You know, I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, that's you know, that's very, you know, it's a powerful point in this respect, Abdullahi. There are those who've always been jittery. Of course, you know, the Ethiopians have come up with a very unique ethnic federal system. And, you know, we have very heterogeneous populations across Africa. So this caused nervousness. Yes. Old guard people who feel that Africa should not be fragmenting, we should be uniting, and we're moving towards a, you know, African free trade area. In East Africa, we are working towards a political federation, etc. And so one of the ways in which Abiy's investment of energy and time in developing this prosperity party has been that, yes, it shifts Ethiopia from a ethnic federalist model back into a centralist model. But of course, that carries baggage in Ethiopia's case. And how do you think the general, you know, outside Oromia, how will this be received amongst the Amhara, you know, Gaden, etc.? This attempt to, as it were, re-centralize.
I think that is a very central question in Ethiopia moving forward. All other things will flow from that. Within the Amhara population, yes. And don't forget, if Oromos are 34%, the Amharas are 27%. Yes. That is over half of the country. Yes. You know, even within them, they are jittery because what happens is within the federal state, you're given autonomy over certain issues. Yes. You know, you can run and manage your affairs. Yes. So for most of these marginal groups, yes. Having this level of autonomy since 1995 is an incredibly creative way of dealing with an issue. Yes. You know, national unity is an incredibly useful element. But at the same time, if the national unity means power is centralized at the center, and then the resource also follows power, it leaves a lot of people vulnerable. So giving people some some chance to determine their destiny. Issues around school, which language would you use? Can you generate your own taxes that you can use over and above what the state can give you? The central function of the federal government then becomes security, peace and security, and foreign affairs. And so that is always a very careful negotiation that state can do, and that is the magic. And that is the magic of the 1995 multi-ethnic federal constitution. And for a lot of people who felt that even that did not go far enough, when you're saying you've been given one half and you are saying now, no, I'm taking even that half, when you've been complaining that even that one half is not enough, that generates a lot of problems. And never mind, John, like in 2005, when they had the election, EPDRF struggled. Yeah. It really struggled, and they had to suppress, a lot of people were killed and a lot of, nefarious activities took place. And so you're talking to a party that's, yes, powerful. It's invested in, it's military, it's invested in business. It's one of the biggest powerful parties, coalition party in Africa. But, it is also struggling under the weight of so many contradictions, so many overlapping, competing interests in some areas. And so how Abiy will negotiate that with PP or Prosperity Party? Would he be able to reach out across the aisle to TPLF? Would he be able to reach out to some of the splinter Oromo groups? Because what you'll have is he might get his final wish of centralizing the state. Yes. Sure, Dark did that. But what was the consequence in the end? Yes. I think federalism, particularly on certain issues, in a multi-ethnic setup like Africa, countries like Ethiopia and Kenya included, is a dose, is a valve. Yes. It's a pressure valve that releases some of the tension. What you will do is now you'll start blaming your MCA and your governors rather than saying, oh no, it's at the center that these guys are making us suffer. Sure, the center has a huge role to play. And that is why, just to give, not to compare apples and oranges, even people who had completely different outlook and support came together around the revenue sharing plan that was published in Kenya. People ideally are, they're like, a different part of the world when it comes to outlook. Yeah. But also people who you didn't think will come together came together. And so these are the contradictions that, the colonial state that we are given, that we are still negotiating, some areas better than others. But I think centralizing it, would be a huge mistake on Abiy's side, because it will tap into all the existing contemporary sense of marginalization, disenfranchisement of various communities, particularly the two ethnic communities, that is the Amaras and the Oromos.
That's fascinating, and of course, we have a quasi-federal system here. We have a devolved system of government here, which has its problems. But yes, in terms of support amongst ordinary citizens, it has very strong support. It's of the new constitution that Kenya passed. It's the most popular. Give me just a little bit of an overview of the economic situation in Ethiopia, because by the time Abiy was coming in, things were pretty difficult. And there are those who argue that some of the changes that saw Abiy come to power were also driven by economic circumstances, which, getting information out of Ethiopia is not the easiest thing in the world. So, it comes out in bits and drabs, but maybe if you can just speak to that briefly.
I think Ethiopia is a classic case of, country that around the world is famed for, doing all these wonderful things. Speak to any World Bank consultant, they will say, the GDP of this country is growing at an astronomical rate. But when you look at the reality, it was really struggling. The economic reality in the country wasn't that better. Sure, it was better than some other years, but it was really a steal. If you look at even the number of people who do not have access to electricity, it's over 60 million people do not have access to electricity. I know we'll talk about that with respect to the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. And so it was really struggling. It was really struggling to get things done. I mean, like, there is only so much that state control, central control can do. I mean, like, I've spoken to people who used to have, flower businesses in Ethiopia, and they just have to leave because of exchange control that they have in the country, and the state is almost involved in every sector of the economy, particularly the military, and Abiy, to his credit, to be honest with you, he wanted to try and change some of those things. Okay. And that is going to take longer. These are not, places where you can just switch things and then kumbaya, everything will be all right. It's going to take a while. And so the economy was in real trouble. And that is why you saw, the UAE moving in very quickly. They gave him some liquidity. I mean, like, the country was struggling for liquidity. And so UAE promised or gave $1 billion and $2 or $3 other $1 billion that, they promised that they will give because the economy wasn't really hacking. And, a lot of it also, you cannot underestimate Melles's force of personality and vision to drive through some of these things, including the starting of the process of building the dam. But for most part, I mean, like, it's still a country that is very vulnerable to serious economic shocks, both domestic and external. If it doesn't rain for 2 seasons, I mean, Ethiopia will have serious food shortages. But it's a country also that has not fully exploited its potential. I mean, like, hydroelectric power is just one of them. 2 is agriculture. I mean, it hasn't modernized. The state likes controlling. Control means a lot of problems. You need to let people be able to do some of these things and, provide, legal policy and administrative framework within which people can do. I think that is the economic reality that also propelled, a lot of anger, disenfranchisement, and sense of despondence. Sure, I mean, like, there were real issues, but there were underlying structural issues. The Metropolitan was just a fuse that, sparked everything. But I think underlying structural reality was that it was the weight of contradictions, both political, economic, and social, all came together and found its expression because the Amaras have always been accused of, oh no, they want to take us back to the imperial age. The Oromos on the other side, they are being said, oh, these guys are, they are barbaric, they are uncivilized, they are very insular, they want to secede from Ethiopia. So the playing off of this group was a good currency for the EPDRF. But you can see when they came together, during 2014, 2017, they managed to have the change that they had, because a lot of the time, the change wasn't just on the streets, it was a huge part. Even within EPDRF, the Oromo party as well as the Amara party came together. But I think that was just at the political level. Economically, I think it wouldn't have gone on for too long. I mean, him coming into power might have prevented, a very difficult situation.
Abdullahi, as we go towards concluding, there has been a lot of debate, a lot written about the great Renaissance dam that Ethiopia is building. And of course, Egypt has been concerned about this for decades now, but it's happening now.
Yes.
And the last report I saw, there was some rain, so the dam is filling itself. But give me some context and some sort of geopolitical analysis of this. Especially coming out of Egypt, the tone has become more and more shrill as the completion of the dam arrives, and the waters of the Nile have always been an extraordinary resource, more valuable than the oil and other things that we have in this region.
I think that is probably one of the most interesting development in the Horn now. It brings so many pieces together. the Horn has always been a very volatile region. You know, it predates the Cold War. I mean, like the Foshanda incident between the British and French in Sudan. But what is very interesting now, you know, post the Cold War, the Gulf crisis that happened in 2016 brought some of it to the Horn.
Oh.
Right? You know, what you have is, you know, in order to execute the conflict in Yemen, you know, UAE and other Gulf actors were looking to woo some of these countries in the Horn, right? Ethiopia, the port of Berbera, was very important for UAE in order to execute that. Eritrea and UAE, and that brought tension between UAE and Qatar. Qatar had to withdraw some of its forces that was, you know, keeping the peace between Djibouti and Eritrea, because Eritrea decided to give a naval base to UAE to execute the conflict in Yemen. And some of the people that were recruited initially to go and fight in Sudan were in Yemen were the Janjaweed from Sudan, right? And you know, a lot of the time we get caught into the big actors, you know, the USA and China over the military base in Djibouti. It's much, much deeper than that. And the worry is some of these latter day, you know, second tier or third tier global powers, you know, your UAE, Qataris, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey, they don't move within a specific, you know, framework. It's not done from DOD, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then the presidency or something like that. A lot of it is done, it's dependent on checkbook diplomacy. A lot of it is done dependent extremely on personal relations. That's why Qatar has been incredibly very, very strong inside Somalia. I think 2 or now 3 presidents they had their hand in getting them elected. So the Renaissance Dam comes in that milieu that is incredibly volatile, right? For Egypt, this is an existential crisis, right? It depends on 90% of its water on the Nile Dam, right? Aswan generates, I think, 1/10 of its power. For Ethiopia, they're saying, if we're the ones who are generating over 80% of the water for the Nile, why don't we have this? You know, for Egypt, I mean, the 6,000 megawatts is huge amount of electricity, 13 turbines. That would be a game changer for Ethiopia. Not just the Ethiopia, for the neighboring riparian regions, where now they can export power on the cheap. For Egypt now, this is going to be incredibly challenging. But the only basis Egypt has is the 1959 treaty that was signed between Egypt and Sudan, where they are entitled not only to veto power, but a significant percentage of the water. So Egypt, you don't forget, this is why the Gulf crisis is important. When Qatar and UAE's conflict came out, Egypt was siding with the UAE. Right? Egypt is the UAE's and, you know, Saudi's enforcer. So that now puts, you know, the region in a very difficult balance. You know, Abiy got some money from UAE. How would he negotiate that? You know, Egypt is on the side of the UAE. Egypt is a serious player for the US, particularly with respect to not only the Middle East peace process, but also with respect to Libya that is falling apart because Turkey and the rest are moving in on the UAE. So I think what this presents is an opportunity where all the crises that we've had in the Horn, all of them finding their expression through this dam now. You know, a careful, you know, diplomatic effort is the only way, because for Ethiopia, I mean, when they didn't get the money from outside, they floated a bond where businesses, you know, civil servants, an average Ethiopian country bought a bond to make this happen. So at this point, the discussion shouldn't be about whether they will fill the dam, is how would they fill the dam? You know, it needs to be staggered to the extent that now Egypt has to find a way of living, I think, in a phased way, not having the monopoly of the Nile waters. So that is going to be very interesting, because even for Sudan, if they can get, you know, cheaper electricity from this, it might not necessarily sit with Egypt on the same side. So I think there are very many multiple moving pieces, and you will see a lot of confusion online. In Ethiopia, some of the even Hachalu's death was blamed on Egypt. There'll be a lot of conspiracy, but the reality is whatever happens in the Horn doesn't stay in the Horn, and for that it's going to be incredibly interesting when you look at all the dramas in the countries of the Horn. And, Kenya included, the AMISOM will have to wind up next year towards the end. What does that mean? So I think we are entering a very interesting time is all I could say.
Thank you. Incisive as always. Abdullahi Boru Halakhe, my friend. That was very, very, very informative, and I am really looking forward to coming back to you to discuss developments in Ethiopia, Somalia, where Kenya has also got some tensions going there. Then Djibouti, but also to touch on the situation in within Kenya.
For sure.
In Marsabit and other places where I remember I think around 2014 was it? Quite a bit of violence in Moyale, and that has resurged in the last 2 or 3 months. Some killings have taken place there. Now, sitting here in Nairobi, sometimes this doesn't come to us, but clearly there are still tensions there that I'll be very keen to unpack with you. So. Abdullahi, I'd like to say thank you very much for your time. Thank you for taking time to speak to the elephant. And we'll be coming back to you with more questions about the Horn. Thank you so much for your time.
Please. My pleasure, John. Have a nice weekend. Take care.
And stay safe.
I will, Asante Ndugu. Thank you.